Inside Outer Limits is a regular feature on the Paranormal UK radio network. Hello everybody once more, and welcome to another Inside Outer Limits radio show with myself, Chris Evers, the man from Outer Limits magazine, and my co-host, who is of course better known as UFO royalty, the one and only Mr. Philip Mantle. Hello.
Good evening, Chris.
How are you, sir?
I can't complain, mate, can't complain, and if I could it wouldn't make any difference anyway.
Well, nobody'd listen, would
they? No.
Yeah. And it been up to anything good recently?
Yeah. You know, as ever, Chris, there's always something, bubbling here. I think you'll remember last year I made a 4-part documentary series on the alien autopsy film called Alien Autopsy: The Search for Answers. And
which is well,
it went out on, Amazon Prime and you could download it. Anyway, starting next week on the 22nd is the TV channel Blaze, which is part of the A&E network, having a whole week of UFO documentaries. It's simply called UFO Week. And I'm pleased to say that the first part of it, they've chosen our documentary series on the alien autopsy. And as a result, throughout this week, I've been doing a number of media interviews to promote not just the documentary, but the whole of UFO Week. Some of that has already gone out, and some will be going out tomorrow and Monday, I believe. So that's certainly kept me busy.
Yeah, but do you know what, Phil? I was actually going to mention this, so you've already brought it up. My wife said to me the other day, does it feel strange watching your co-host for your radio show on the TV? I said, no, he gets everywhere, so it don't worry me at all.
I still find it very strange, Chris. I just treat myself as a daft lad from East Ardsley. And I know when it was on Amazon, my oldest daughter, put it on the TV, and she didn't tell the grandchildren. She's got 3 grandchildren, and just sat there, and they're kind of looking at the screen with their mouths open, thinking, well, there's Grandad there. They couldn't quite figure out why Grandad was on the telly, you know what I mean? It's still very funny.
Excellent.
So still working on new books as well. One of the books that I've been working on in the last couple of days is by 2 well-known authors from the United States. That's Don Schmidt and Tom Carey, well renowned for their work on Roswell, of course. And this will be a Roswell book. It's called Touched by Roswell, and it's about all the sort of famous people who have either been involved with the Roswell case or have commented on it in one form or another. And I suppose today, uploading photographs, they've sent me hundreds to choose from. So it will be a commercial book, not a research side of things, which I think's a nice change for the authors themselves.
Yeah.
So that's what I've been doing, mate.
Yeah, that's excellent. Well, I've got the latest edition of Outer Limits magazine all ready to go, and we've got quite a few bits and bobs in that. As I think I sent you a message the other day, Phil, with some information on about that, and we've got a little bit more on the man from the mystery. I think you're aware about that one. And there's plenty of information in there. Summoning a UFO by one of the Kinsella twins, who are of course regular contributors to Outer Limits magazine. Now, talking about books, who have we got today?
We've got one of our colleagues from across the Atlantic, I'm pleased to say. On our podcast, we had, guests from different parts of the world. We had a gentleman by the name of Paul Smith. Paul is blessed with a beautiful southern accent because he comes from southern Missouri. And I hope it's not an area that I've been reading about on the news recently in the southern part of the states that's been bombarded by a number of tornadoes. As people that know me will know of my involvement and my friendship with Calvin Parker in Mississippi. And, they get bombarded with all hosts of severe weather. And I jokingly asked Calvin, is there any part of the United States that doesn't get some form of serious weather? Either it's too hot, too cold, too wet, hurricanes, tornadoes, and he just kind of laughed. So I'm pleased tonight we have from Southern Missouri, Paul Blake-Smith. Good evening, Paul.
Good evening. Thanks for having me on.
Hi, Paul. Welcome.
Well, it's our pleasure, Paul. I mean, for those that are not aware, Paul is an author. You can find out more about Paul and all of his books. We're going to look at some of them tonight. You can go to his website, www.mo41.info, and you'll find out all you need to know about Paul and his books. But before we get on to the books, Paul, how did you get involved in UFO research? How did you get involved like down the years?
Well, I've always been at least mildly interested in the subject. We used to hear about it occasionally in the news when I was a kid. And around the year 2000, I began to hear a very familiar name in the news through something like Coast to Coast, AMRL. I don't know if you get that in the United Kingdom.
Yeah.
Okay, and they were talking about the 1941 UFO crash in Cape Girardeau, Missouri. And cha-ching, that's where my eyes lit up because that's where I'm from. I spent my first 35 years in Cape Girardeau, and I had not heard this story. And I wanted to learn more, and I would see little dribs and drabs in UFO books and online. And I'm thinking, this is a fascinating, exciting story. And I asked my dad about it because he was 6 years old at the time. And he said he recognized all these names in the tale, but he didn't know of the story per se. And my grandfather was a judge in Cape Girardeau at the time, but he has been long since passed away. So I got so tired of waiting for someone to produce a book on the subject, I decided to just research it myself and write one. And it came out so well that I had enough information for a second book. And right now I'm talking to some TV production people, and we're hoping to get a little something on the air more exclusively dedicated to the subject. Things are so clogged up with backed up projects from the economic shutdown and the pandemic that all I can do is cross my fingers and hope.
So this is, you say, you've actually done about, is it 4, 5, 6 books?
Yeah, I've written about 6 books now. The Cape Girardeau UFO book was my first one. And my most recent one was on a second UFO story I've always found intriguing. And again, I couldn't find any books on this subject. It's the most amazing tale you've ever heard, that a United States president went to meet with friendly extraterrestrials and kept it reasonably hushed up and quiet. And I thought, well, this has been on television and Ancient Aliens and MUFON Hangar 1 and some other shows. They mentioned it for about 2 minutes and move on. I'm thinking, wow, this is the biggest blockbuster story ever. Where is there a book? So I got up waiting for a book and wrote my own, and it's doing quite well. You can still find it on Amazon.com.
Okay, do you want to give us a title for that then, Paul? People can go and search for that and buy it if they wish.
President Eisenhower's Close Encounters. And it deals with not just his 1954 face-to-face encounter, but some other interesting anecdotes and stories where he may have had some other contact, which we can discuss during the course of this fine show.
Yeah, well, it's interesting you should mention these, Paul. I run Flying Disc Press just on my own here in the UK, but I have a colleague in France who runs the French arm of it, and he's a chap by the name of Jean Libero. And Jean is a big fan of yours, I have to say, and he was talking initially about your book on Cape Girardeau. Have I pronounced it correctly?
That's right. And Mr. Worrell's obviously got keen insight into human behavior and fine books. So
he did, because, as soon as Chris said, we're looking at recommending this gentleman for a spot on the show, I'd already been talking to Jean about it in France, and he was saying, you must get hold of these books, Philip. Jean, is an enthusiastic guy. I keep telling him I've got about 6 books that I'm reading at the moment. But it's called, is it MO41, The Bombshell Before Roswell, the 2020 revised edition?
That is correct. Sometimes I call it MO 41 or MO 41. MO standing for Missouri, and 1941 for the year it happened, to kind of tip people off that this was 6 years before Roswell.
I was going to ask you what the MO stood for, but you've beaten me. So tell us a little bit more about this case at Cape Girardeau, if you would please, Paul.
Well, back in 1941, Cape Girardeau, Missouri had about 20,000 people, and it was a very conservative, quiet Christian community based right next to the Mississippi River. And they had a church called the Red Star Baptist Tabernacle in those days. And a Reverend William Guy Huffman was in town to help raise funds for the church and do some pastoring. He was a very fine man. I researched him, and he's well thought of to this day. And one night he said that he was called up on the phone at home and asked to go with a person who was associated with the Cape Girardeau Police Department to what they thought was an airplane crash. So he took off with this gentleman in an unmarked car, and they drove about 12 or 13 miles out into the countryside where there's a lot of farming, a lot of agricultural communities. And they eventually made their way to a burning field that had fire department there fighting this blaze around some wreckage. He was expecting, an airplane and probably maybe injured or dead people, maybe even body parts. It was probably something he braced himself up for emotionally, that this is going to be pretty gruesome if it's a plane crash. And in those days, they call a doctor, nurses, Cape Police Department, Fire Department, FBI. Reverend Huffman said there was at least one or more military men at the scene observing things and talking, and he was brought in to say any prayers or offer any spiritual comfort to any of the victims or their families if they showed up. People would be very concerned. So he was stunned to find out what was laying in the field as he took a closer look and walked right up to this crash debris and 3 bodies on the ground. I'll bet you don't have any interest at all in hearing about the details of what those bodies look like.
No, we're not interested at all. No. Go on, tell us, please.
All right, if you want to drag it out of me. They were 3 identical-looking silvery gray aliens, your typical grays we call them these days, with big bulbous round heads, big black eyes, maybe 2 really tiny dots for nostrils, maybe a bit of a slit for a mouth, no ears, extra long arms, kind of long, thin arms and legs, and quite possibly 3 or 4 fingers and a long thumb. If you've ever seen a video called Skinny Bob, does that name ring a bell with you, gentlemen?
Yes.
That creature sure matches the description of what Reverend Huffman said he saw, according to his surviving granddaughter, in an interview, that it was very much like that creature. So we might refer to that. The 3 of the 3 dead, or of the 3 aliens, 2 were dead, and 1 was just barely alive, barely breathing. They were all face up in the grass. And I believe Reverend Huffman may have said that he heard someone at the site say the bodies were pulled out of the wreckage of this round, silvery gray craft that was cracked open, and lots of debris and shrapnel were in this field that was on fire, and the police were putting out the smoldering remains of the blaze. And it was starting to attract a bit of a crowd. Some people came around from the local farm communities, and they were just stunned by this, what I heard was called Little Spaceman and their little spaceship. This was from a woman who told me that she was about 10 or 11 at the time, and she didn't see the incident, but her parents and family were all talking about it in front of her, and she said, we didn't use terms like extraterrestrial or even alien. She said, we just called them little spacemen, and that everyone was abuzz with excitement in the community because of this, even though they weren't supposed to be talking about this whatsoever. The military arrived on the scene that night and hemmed in the crash site and swore people to secrecy and said, you did not see this. This did not happen. This is a matter of national security. You're to keep your mouth shut, apparently for the rest of your lives. And happily, some people blabbed right away, including the Pastor Huffman, who went home and talked to his family. They were naturally very worried about him, like, where have you been? And he said, well, it was not an airplane crash. And he told his family the whole story that night, and apparently he never spoke of it again. He was really rattled, as any one of us would be, because there were no aliens in mainstream pop culture back then. There was barely any television, and movies basically didn't touch on the subject other than maybe a Buck Rogers comic strip type B movie, and or a comic strip in the newspaper might show someone from outer space. But it was just probably treated very lighthearted. Many people probably never even considered the fact that there are other beings visiting here. By early 1941, America was not at war, but the United Kingdom certainly was at that time.
Mm-hmm. So the main focus of the book, though, is President Eisenhower's February 1954 meeting with the extraterrestrials, and we know that it was kept secret from the public. But so how and when did that story first break?
Right. In my most recent book, the Cape Girardeau one is from 2016. This recent one came out in late 2020. I began reading stories that said President Eisenhower, while he was on a golf vacation in Palm Springs, was called away by Air Force officials to come to Edwards Air Force Base, sometimes known as Muroc. That was the old name of it. And they considered the visitors who had just landed at the airfield to be friendly and that it was safe. And the president went out there and talked to them. And I thought, wow, this is a big, big story. I want to know every scrap, every detail. And I spent years researching this and putting it all together. And it is an amazing tale, and the first part is a little difficult to swallow on the surface, that President Eisenhower loved to go golfing in Augusta, Georgia, which was a few hundred miles from Washington, D.C. He loved it there so much that they even built him a home on the fairway. So what was he doing 2,700 miles from Washington playing golf in Palm Springs? Well, that certainly appears now to have been the cover story, the excuse for a prearranged visit, that this was set up at least a year in advance, and that Eisenhower wanted to meet with some friendly aliens who made contact with Air Force officials, apparently through a high-frequency radio type contact during the year. And he decided that he would play golf out there as the excuse, and if there was any landing, and the Air Force did deem it safe, that he would go out and meet with these friendly aliens face to face, and he did so. And according to one eyewitness, they were human-like. They were what I call cousins of human beings. They were shaped like us, a little shorter and a little misshapen here and there, maybe because they had a different atmosphere that they breathed on their planet, so maybe their lungs or chests were a little larger or smaller, their nostrils maybe a little larger or smaller. And they may well have had very, very little hair and a slightly different skin tone to them. And Eisenhower surrounded himself with a team of bodyguards, and he spoke with them. They spoke English, and they expressed what they were there for and what they could do for him. And then after their meeting was over, again, Eisenhower pulled out the playbook from Cape Girardeau in 1941 and said, this didn't happen. You're not going to talk about this. Everyone at the base was sworn to secrecy. Eisenhower went back to Palm Springs where he was on vacation, and I don't think at the time hardly anyone was the wiser. But as the months and years went by, rumors and innuendo and facts began to leak out, and it's just an amazing story, all the details of how they managed to pull this off and cover it up and maybe duplicate it the next year in New Mexico at an air base called Holloman Air Force Base.
Okay. Can I ask something, please, Paul? I mean, you know, I'll play devil's advocate here, if I may. And it's one of the things that makes people scratch their heads. We'll go to the Cape Girardeau incident, if we may. You know, why would it be that, you know, an alien vehicle comes from wherever, obviously a long way, somehow, and then when it gets here, it crashes? You know.
Yeah. I get that question a lot. Aliens are so advanced and intelligent, why would they crash? And I'm thinking, well, they are from an entirely different world, not familiar with Earth and our magnetic pull and our gravitational forces and our weather fronts. We've got pilots who are well trained in all of this, and they crash. So why can't aliens who are not familiar with this also crash? They could have mechanical error, pilot error, or weather-related accidents, just like we can. They may be very intelligent, but they're not perfect.
No, not at all. And again, playing devil's advocate, it sound very similar, apart from the fire, to the Roswell incident, does it not? With the debris and the creatures and then the threats and secrecy and things of that nature.
I'll admit that is true. I don't know whether that is coincidence or not, but I'll just give a little side story. There was apparently a Cape Girardeau fireman who was dying of cancer. He had stage 4 cancer late in life, and he supposedly gathered his family close and said, there's something I want to tell you. You know this story floating about a Cape Girardeau minister who saw a spaceship in a burning field? He said, that story is true. I was there. I was fighting the fire. The military did come in and swear us to secrecy. They caught me trying to pocket a piece of the debris that I found in the field. They chewed me out and they kicked me out of the crash site. He said I was very nervous because in the days afterwards, he felt he was being watched around town. People were keeping an eye on him in case he wanted revenge for being chewed out and kicked out of the site, and he felt that his phone was tapped. So that's just another piece of the story which lends me some more credibility. Obviously, all of this is circumstantial and anecdotal, but when you put it all together, it sounds like a legitimate story to me. I tried to cram as many facts and resources into my book as I could. I haven't really caught anyone in a lie. The problem with researching it from my point of view is that everyone is long since dead. They were sworn to secrecy in the first place, and then in many cases their children are now deceased. But I would get little dribs and drabs, and some people contacted me after the book came out, and they had little tales to support the book once again that said, I heard this from my mother, or my grandmother told me this, and it all still hangs together.
Hey, I find it fascinating. Sorry, go on, Chris.
Sorry, Phil. I was just going to point out how many times have mankind sent probes to Mars, and how many times have the crash landed. You know, it does show that if it can happen to us, I suppose it could happen to visitors to the planet from another system or another planet.
The way I would look at that, Mars is relatively close. You know, in astronomical terms, it's very close. And, we don't, have the technology to travel between the stars yet, whereas aliens, if that's what we want to call them, would have to have some form of interstellar travel. What worries me about these stories, Paul, and it's just a little itch on the that I keep scratching now and again, is not what we have in front of us, it's what's missing. And when I look at an incident like this, and the same goes with Roswell or anything else, surely if we had a crashed vehicle from, another star system, we'd study it. Would you agree with that? We would study the wreckage, right. Even the creatures. That would involve teams of different people from a whole range of different disciplines, from biology, cryptography, metallurgy, physics, I mean, you name it. And as a result, their research would make a mountain of paperwork somewhere, but yet none of that has ever, leaked out. And the way I look at it, probably one of the biggest secrets of this era that the Americans they conducted was, of course, the Manhattan Project. A little bit later, of course, as you point out, in 1941, America hadn't entered the Second World War. It was just a matter of time before they did. And, of course, the Manhattan Project, they built a town, basically. But despite all the secrecy, despite all of that, it did leak out. And even the Russians, got their hands on some of the information. But when it comes to incidents like this, not a thing. Yeah, lots of rumours and, and innuendos and circumstantial evidence, but nothing of a tangible nature. And that's the only thing that bothers me. It doesn't matter what theory you put forward for it. Like Roswell, there's a number of theories. The latest one is in a couple of books from Nick Redfern, where he believed it was a military experiment that went wrong involving captured POWs. And, of course, that would have broke the Geneva Convention and various other conventions at the same time. But yet, there is nothing to substantiate that. There's no smoking gun.
It's a legitimate case you brought up. Occasionally, you hear from someone who claims this or alleges that, and some paperwork, some documents do tend to leak out. I can get that in a minute. But I think one of the key factors is that the military has control over all of this and use military personnel, and you order them to keep quiet. And if you want to live, if you want to be healthy, you want your family to be healthy, do you want a pension plan and a salary, then you better keep your mouth shut. And I think they can use any manner of threat to, ensure security over the years. When I think about the Cape Girardeau story, some leaked documents came out a few years ago called the White Hot Report, which was a report by General Nathan Twining. He was sent by Harry Truman to New Mexico, and I believe those documents are legitimate. And he's talking about what they recovered from the desert outside Roswell in the White Hot Intelligence Estimate. It says in that document and says, what we recovered, based on all evidence from recovered exhibits, these items are deemed extraterrestrial in nature. The consensus was reached as a result of comparisons of artifacts from the discovery of 1941. And there was a blacked out area in there, and the words from Missouri fit that blank perfectly. And elsewhere in the report, it says, even the recovery case of 1941 did not create a unified intelligence effort on spaceship recovery. So, what else could they possibly be referring to other than the Cape Girardeau discovery, which had a crash and some bodies? And so that's one document, one leak from a military source.
From an alleged military source.
Right. Yeah.
I've read that document. The thing is, they're a bit like the MJ12 documents. Fascinating to read, but at the end of the day, there's no provenance with them. And the thing about this being, the military being in charge, may have been in charge at the initial incident, but like I say, when it came to the study of this, it would have been civilians, like it was with the Manhattan Project, and it did leak out. And that's the thing that bothers me. Not only that, let's assume that you're correct with this, if we would call it, something did happen just pretty much the way you've described it. And why would they cover it up? Why would we keep such a thing quiet?
One key factor, I'm sure, is in America we had a bit of a panic from the War of the Worlds radio broadcast from Halloween 1938, just less than 3 years from the Cape Girardeau crash, in which people hearing this report on the radio, aliens have landed, they panicked and ran from their homes or grabbed their guns, or a few people had heart attacks. There were massive calls to police and newspaper offices asking, are we being invaded? Despite the fact that the radio production was entirely false, fiction, and they even said so repeatedly during the broadcast. That shows you the level of people paying attention, to the fact that it was just a play put on. So I think military and government people took that very seriously, and looking at whether we should release this information or not, we could be triggering another panic, maybe a stock market crash, or at least affecting it. And no one wanted to revert back to the harshest days of the Great Depression. In military circles, most things are usually considered secret, and when in doubt, don't let it out. And eventually some of those get declassified or leaked out days later.
Yeah, I remember the so-called 1938 thing by Orson Welles. A colleague of mine some years back by the name of John Spencer, who used to be the chairman of the British Ufo Research Association, did some digging into the claims made about the panic, the 1938 panic, and couldn't find anything to substantiate it. Yes, there were some newspaper headlines, but the source of a lot of these quotes were direct from Orson Welles himself.
Right.
So the panic seemed to be a continuation of his radio show. He invented the panic himself. And as you said at the beginning of your talk here, that a lot of people, had no idea about UFOs, aliens, and things like that. Mm-hmm. So for me, it doesn't add up. The military would keep this classified, not only keep it classified at that point back in 1941, but of course they kept it classified ever since. And let's say there may have been reasons why there was, it was a different time in the 1940s. The powers that be in the States knew that sooner or later they were going to get dragged into the war in Europe. It was only a matter of time. But times have changed, and I can't understand for the life of me why we would keep such an event. It would be the most spectacular event in human history, contact with beings from another world. And we would just cover it up and keep it covered up. To me, I just can't, I can't grasp it. I really can't.
We don't know if the two memorandums from President Roosevelt are legit, but they've been leaked over the past decade and a half. And one of them is a memorandum in 1942 talking about application of non-terrestrial know-how and perfecting a super weapon of war from it. Well, that alone would have classified it, top secret, keep the lid on this. Finding practical uses for their atomic secrets learned from the study of celestial devices, which once again makes you think, well, in 1942, what other factor could be involved? A celestial device, non-terrestrial know-how, other than what they pulled out of a farm field in Cape Girardeau, Missouri. And in another memo, President Roosevelt referred to it as a state secret. We must keep this confined as a state secret among us, so that if these memorandums are legitimate, that would show, once again, need for national security and to keep these secrets from our enemies like the Nazis and the Japanese and apply what we learn to our ongoing atomic bomb program. So it's just, it's enticing, and I sure wish we had more evidence than this. We have to go on anecdotal and circumstantial, but it's extremely intriguing. Another quick story was Dr. Otto Kraus, a compatriot of his, said that he was at a Nevada atomic bomb test site in 1962, and the man asked Dr. Kraus, where did we get all this knowledge to finish the atom bomb? And the doctor supposedly said there was a crash in the Ozarks. A UFO crashed in Missouri in 1941, and they extracted the knowledge from the propulsion device in that crash. So that's, again, an anecdotal story, no proof, no one's on camera, or writing a whole book about it, but it's very, very intriguing.
Absolutely. So, Paul, the actual meeting in February of 1954 with President Eisenhower, and how was the summit set up in advance?
Well, supposedly, and I get into this in the book, there was an extraterrestrial craft that crashed in New Mexico in 1948 near a place called Aztec. And it was basically just cracked and almost completely undamaged otherwise. And according to some leaked documents, the government managed to bust it open, and they accidentally killed, if I can find a better word, the crew that was on board. But they managed to revive one alien that was, again, very much like the 54 case, a very human-like creature who spoke English. And supposedly he was a bit of a mechanic on board the ship, and he knew the communication device. So they brought it to him, and that might be a case where that device was used to contact his race and set up a meeting with President Eisenhower a few years later. And that's a pretty wild-sounding story, but while I was giving an interview for another show, an older gentleman called in and said this exact story. He says, I worked with the government. I can't tell you a whole lot, but we did recover a craft, and we managed to get a communications device out of it, and we put it to good use. And I'm thinking that's probably what was utilized in 53 and 54 through a series of communications to set up Eisenhower meeting face-to-face with some very friendly aliens. There's another story of a congressman named Henry McElroy who gave a little video presentation in 2010. And he said, I read some documents when I was in the government, and they said President Eisenhower was presented a report talking about communication with a friendly alien race, and that they wanted to meet face to face. And the congressman said, according to what I read, Eisenhower went for it. And he really did go meet with them in person after it was ascertained they were quite friendly and peaceful, and they wanted to speak to him face to face. I don't know why a U.S. congressman would risk his reputation and maybe his life or his pension in revealing that, but he was just trying to be honest and say, I read this report. He did not have it with him. Obviously, it was a kind of classified top secret thing that he was allowed to read as part of his government access. So once again, it's very frustrating not to have something that is absolute concrete proof, but there's another little piece of the tale.
Yeah, so the aliens that crash landed then in 1941, were these the same species that Eisenhower met in 1954?
No, the ones in Cape Girardeau were tiny little gray men, about 4.5 feet tall, when stretched out. And the aliens from Edwards Air Force Base, who landed apparently in 5 different ships, were very human-like, slightly different from us, and were about 5 feet tall, and they did not have abnormally large heads or abnormally long arms and fingers and such. They were 2 different races. You remember Philip Corso, who died some years ago?
Yes.
Phil said that these gray aliens that you would see in the Roswell crash story or Cape Girardeau, his sources in the American government said they felt those were bio-robots that were created to do some of the dirty work for other races, to go on scout ships and take samples and such, and then bring back the information, or maybe a live cow or something, and to bring it back to the more masterful, advanced race. And that may be what the Cape Girardeau or Roswell aliens were, like bio-robots who were identical. They looked like they'd been punched out of a mold in a factory, whereas other beings seem to have greater differences and more nuances, and were more sophisticated, somewhat more like humans, I guess.
Yeah, well, again, I'll go back to this thing about the cover-up, if I may, please, Paul. Because obviously in the 1950s, the Cold War was up and running, and even then there was thoughts of perhaps a conflict at some point with the Soviets, which manifested itself in all its glory in the early 1960s with the Cuban Missile Crisis. This is just the way I look at it. If I was the president at the time, why not go public with this and say, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, yeah, we've got our own military, but you'll never guess what these guys have brought with them, which has now landed on US soil, so you better not mess with us. I think that would be a great reason for going public. I can't still figure out, and then what you were saying about why they crashed in the first place. They didn't know anything about the Earth, but then by the 1950s, the ones that were there could speak English. So surely they must have been, surveying the Earth, because they could, right. And why would they speak English? And why not one of the other languages? Just seems a bit too convenient for my way of looking at things.
Well, what the aliens wanted from President Eisenhower was a halt to his reckless atomic bomb testing program, in which he was detonating atom bombs in the air, in the sea, on the land, and they seem almost oblivious to the nuclear contamination and fallout and stuff from this stuff going on that he had given the green light to. He was in charge of the program. It was called the Castle Atom Bomb Program. And I could see where any observing, caring alien race would see this going on and say, oh my God, you got to be kidding me. We got to go talk to this guy face to face and talk some sense to him because he's in charge. And of course, you would learn the English language to communicate with him. And apparently, from what I had in my book and I researched, there's one or two sources that said this was the #1 topic of discussion. Please stop this reckless atomic bomb testing. So if you're going to communicate with anyone in America, you better learn English. And they apparently spoke it reasonably well, being advanced and intelligent beings. I don't know why Eisenhower turned them down. Apparently, one story claimed that Eisenhower was even offered an alternate, top-notch non-nuclear technology, clean energy type program if he would just stop this atom bomb program. And for whatever reasons he decided not to. But one factor I want to point out, there's a new movie out called The 11th Green. Have you heard of that one?
No.
No.
This is an independent film and by a man named Christopher Munch, and it's gotten some attention. It was his version of the Eisenhower encounter, and his sources said the same thing that mine did, that Eisenhower had film cameras set up in advance in this hangar at Edwards Air Force Base to record it, and it makes you think he was going to use this to take the information to the whole world and say, look who aliens chose to come down and land and talk to. Me, your president. And he had it recorded. According to one Vatican source, the Omega Secret, I think it is called, a reporter said he talked to a Vatican source who found out that Cardinal Bishop McIntyre was at the encounter or just after. And Cardinal McIntyre flew to the Pope in the Vatican after the meeting, said there was this meeting and there were film cameras and that the aliens were friendly and such, and they wanted to get out in front of this story, and that there was actual film footage that some people have seen, and some of it was in black and white and some in color. And once again, these are like rumors, little bits and pieces of the story. According to one story, the alien technology clashed with one of the film cameras utilized and caused it to break down during it was filming. So an interesting detail, but that's not proof till we actually see the images, which would be astounding and exciting. But that's in that movie, The 11th Green.
Yeah, I mean, did you manage to track down any information of who else was at this meeting with Eisenhower? You know, any of his aides, or military, civilians, scientists, whatever?
I noticed in doing research on Eisenhower, he was an older man in his 60s, and he pretty much surrounded himself with older men, and they're all long gone. They also probably were military-based and took oaths of secrecy to keep their mouth shut. However, in your country, you have a source who's probably kind of controversial, Lord Clancarty, who said that around 1981 or 82, a source came to him and said, I was at the Eisenhower encounter. I want to tell you the whole story, and I want to do this because everyone is now deceased, and I'm the only one left alive. He said it was an Air Force pilot, a test pilot, who was brought in for his aerodynamics expertise at the time, and that he was there and saw the bodyguards surrounding the president, and he saw the aliens land and walk right up to him and speak in English, that the aliens performed an aerial show at one point, got in their ships and took off and put on a dazzling display, and that Eisenhower was so impressed that he was almost too impressed. The aliens overplayed hand. They showed that they were too advanced, and he said, we can't have this in our world. Our people aren't ready for this. And sadly, he was probably right. So the pilot said we were all sworn to secrecy, and he kept his mouth shut until around 1982 or so, when he talked to the Earl of Clancarty, who was trying to run a member of parliament investigation into UFOs, and apparently he thought that would be a good source to tell. And he said, I'll tell you all this, but please do not ever give my name out. And I don't believe that name was ever released, the test pilot.
And is somewhere in this story something about Eisenhower and a visit to the dentist, a dental visit?
I found in researching that to be that it's a legitimate story that Eisenhower did have a dental problem, and he went racing off one night to get his tooth fixed. What I was told is that he was having a dinner one night in Palm Springs, and he bit into a duck leg, and someone had just shot the duck that morning with grape shot, buckshot. Yeah, and there was metal still in the meat, and he said, "What kind of a sportsman uses buckshot to bring down a bird?" And he was really upset. He broke off a crown off a tooth and was in considerable pain, so the host of the dinner called his dentist, and the dentist said, yeah, sure, the president needs me. And they didn't seem to get it clear to him. They had to call back a few hours later and say, "The president is waiting for you. Get over to your office. This is serious." And then finally the dentist did go over there. His name was Dr. Francis Purell, and he did work on the president's crown that night. But the factor that I found is this was the night after the alien encounter at Edwards Air Force Base. The president did disappear from his vacation, but it was for this legitimate purpose. That was not the night he disappeared from Palm Springs when he took off at night. He did that when there was a big planned party at the hotel for the media in town, and I think that was a legitimate distraction put together to keep reporters away from following the president around as he took off that Friday night, the 19th. It was Saturday when he had a genuine dental problem, and he got it fixed. Probably wasn't too thrilled, but he went to church the next Sunday morning, and all seemed quiet and well.
Fascinating stuff. What? Again, another little thing that irks me when I listen to these stories, and you brought that up. You've talked about different species or different races of aliens visiting us. Is it? I just find it incredible that we'd have one species find us, because the universe is an awfully big place, and I've often argued that if we invented interstellar travel tomorrow, for example, I know it's a bit of a leap, where would we go? If you look up into the heavens, which would be the first star system you would aim for? It is limitless, and I just find it amazing that, okay, let's assume that, beings of another world did find us for whatever reason, but then there's another lot finds us as well. Does that not bother you at all, Paul?
Well, I understand what you're saying. I think we would set our sights first on the planets within our solar system, or take off for the nearest Earth-like planet, which I think some scientists or cosmologists feel that they've got a pretty good beat on now. I'm not an expert in this category, but I've seen some articles where they think there might be what they call exoplanets, something extraterrestrial, even if it's bacteriological or primordial creatures, or cavemen, maybe an advanced state beyond the primordial ooze, as they say, or even legitimate creatures, somewhat human-like. We would probably set our sights for our best shot if we had that. And I'm not an expert in this category, but I do know they're talking about traveling through wormholes, the time and space tunnels that they think they can fathom through our latest scientists. It gets a little over my head, but they think they could obviate the necessity for long years and years of space travel by going through a dimensional access, a portal, or a wormhole, or something like that. So I don't really think aliens spend like Star Trek and they go on a 5-year mission and go poking around. I think they have more advanced methods than that.
It's just curious to me. I mean, I a few years back I spoke with an American scientist called Professor Michio Kaku, who was a physicist.
Yeah.
And he had a book out. It's called Hyperspace. And I managed to catch up with him and get an interview. And he explained things to me in the way you would in Star Trek terminology. So somebody as dumb as me could understand it. And I appreciated that. But yes, he did talk about traveling through space and time in different ways, not in what we would call linear travel, going from A to B. Right. That you could warp and bend space, and you could effectively jump across space in no time at all. And he said, this was, technically possible. It was just we didn't currently have the power to do that. And when I mean power, I mean, that's something to power our space vehicle. So it was technically possible. However, it would still not give you the ways and means of finding other life forms out there. You'd have to find them first. And that's what bothers me. Our knowledge we've gone through all our solar system, and there is nothing here. There may have been bacterial life on Mars. In fact, I'm pretty certain there was, and may even still be. But any sophisticated life forms in our solar system is a non-starter. And we have discovered exoplanets, although we can't see them, so we would have no idea what kind of atmospheric conditions they have, whether they have water. On Earth, where you have water, you have life. So we assume that, the laws of physics apply elsewhere in the universe, so if there's water, there's a chance of life. And then, of course, by the time we got there, let's assume we had the technology to be able to locate a planet that we think could be suitable. Maybe even did have life forms on it. When we got there, we wouldn't be able to speak their language. But yet they turn up here and can speak English, and that kind of bothers me. And not only that, when they turn up, and I'll ask you this question, is they look pretty much like us, Paul. They're humanoid, head, 2 arms, 2 legs. They talk, they breathe the atmosphere. But we've only to look around at the diversity of life on our own little planet and see the weird and wonderful shapes of creatures. But yet, here they come from interstellar space, and they look pretty much like us. Is that not somewhat of a problem, or a coincidence, should I say?
Oh, I agree with everything you said. I don't think we have any life forms on any planet right in our solar system or too close by, and it would take some real travel, and I hope we send out some probes at the least, or someday some sort of extraterrestrial mission like Star Trek. But you're correct in that most of the sightings that come here are somewhat human-like, with 2 arms and legs and that sort of thing. And all I can say is I suppose they're the ones that become the most advanced and are able to access the materials to make machinery, to access portals to come to various places and study other races. As silly as Star Trek may seem sometimes, they do go exploring from planet to planet, and they have something called the Prime Directive, which you're not supposed to get involved with the people on the surface, which naturally Captain Kirk and his crew do in every single episode. Otherwise, they wouldn't have a show, I guess. They ignore Prime Directive, and they do land and get interacting with the people on the planet, and they are almost all human-like, but that's maybe just Hollywood. But it does seem like so many UFO or ET sightings that we have over the past 50 years, they are somewhat human-like in shape, and I have no particular explanation. Maybe there are other races that are filmy or without a solid body or a mass of goo.
I wondered, Paul, if this is not to offend anyone, whether you believe in creation or whether you believe in evolution. I believe in evolution, and I often wondered if the laws of physics apply to evolution as well, in a kind of way that to be an intelligent species that can manipulate its environment like we do, then the best design, be it from a creator or from evolution, is the biped. It's us. So, we are the sort of best biological design to live on planets like this and rise to the top of the food chain, which we have. And if evolution like that happens here, then could it happen pretty much in a similar way elsewhere in the universe? And that, of course, the creatures that then reached us would look pretty similar to us. They'd be bipedal. But I think that's certainly a possibility. But it leaves me with a problem when there's more than one species turns up and they all look pretty similar. I think they should look different. That's just my understanding. But I read somewhere in the information you sent us, Paul, that you're looking somewhere, or you've had discussions about bringing these stories to life, maybe on the small screen or the big screen or something of that nature. Am I right?
That is correct. The negotiations are ongoing. I can't say too much, but it would probably end up dealing with American presidents and their experiences. Maybe you heard like Ronald Reagan may well have seen a UFO while he was in a campaign airplane in 1966, and he told some people. And it's very, very interesting. Another example is President Lyndon Johnson just dropped everything, and he flew across the country to Palm Springs to meet with Dwight Eisenhower on the exact 10th anniversary of the Eisenhower alien encounter. And there were some gaps in LBJ's schedule, and I'm thinking, what in the world was going on here? And I put that into my book. It's very mysterious. It's hard to say this is all a coincidence, February of 64 and February of 54, but it gives you an example that there could be some more data up with these American presidents than we really know. They go on talk shows, Clinton, Bush, Obama, and in America, they go on these talk shows and they ask him, are we being monitored? Are we being visited by aliens? And they give a glib answer and grin and say, well, I could tell you, but I'd have to kill you or something like that. And I think their silence pretty much speaks volumes. They can't give a straight answer. What does that tell us? Probably tells us that, yeah, we are being observed, and they can't talk about it. It's a state secret.
All right, again, reading the information you sent, we're just changing tack a little bit here. Did I read in the information you sent, which we're very grateful for, by the way, you also have been looking into the, different from what we've been talking about, but the assassination of JFK.
Right, I put together a book that came out in 2018.
Right.
And there are some people who think Kennedy knew about the extraterrestrial presence, as was going to speak about it, and that's the reason he was assassinated. I don't believe that is quite the case. Some intelligence operatives may have felt that way, but this was a mafia job. The mafia were outraged by President Kennedy and his brother, and their anti-mafia aimed to wipe them out. And it was like a war, and what do you do in war? You kill or be killed. And the mafia got together and shot him.
What's the title of that book, if I could ask?
That book is called JFK and the Willard Hotel Plot.
Willard Hotel Plot. Because, I'm fascinated by the whole JFK thing. And
me too.
This you'll actually find us on this incident probably agreeing, Paul. I'm no expert. I've met a number of people involved in the JFK saga, and I often thought that what we were looking at was a mafia hit. It had all the hallmarks of it being the mafia. I mean, for those that are not aware, it was mafia money through JFK's father that got them elected. Buying off people and getting the unions to back people and telling their members to vote. And of course, the deal was you leave us alone once you're in power. Oh, yeah, sure. And, of course, once they got to power, Robert Kennedy became the Attorney General, and he was out to get them. And these are the same guys that have just put you in power. So, to me, it had all the hallmarks of it being mafia-based.
Exactly.
And, yeah, it really did. So, we because... Like you've been talking earlier on, if there was UFOs involved, why would JFK want to let it all out, and why would he be killed? It doesn't make a lot of sense, really, does it?
Right. I don't believe that was the reason. Oswald, when he was arrested, Lee Harvey Oswald, said, "Oh, I'm just a patsy." Well, as police will tell you, everyone they bring in says, "Oh, I didn't do it. I'm innocent. I'm a patsy."
Yeah.
Oswald was what I call a guilty patsy. He was firing that day, but he was not alone, and he was the dummy that they threw overboard and said, "Yeah, he did it alone." There were other shots, and the mafia got rid of this guy that was outraging and putting them in jail. A whole campaign through his brother to wipe out the mob. What would you do?
Well, didn't it all sum it up, Paul, when Jack Ruby was the one that assassinated Oswald, and of course Jack Ruby was a small-time hoodlum.
Right. And supposedly he yelled out at the time, "I had to do it." And they found out later he had all kinds of ties to Carlos Marcello, the New Orleans mob boss, who was connected in a minor way to Oswald. And the whole thing comes together. A few years ago, some documents came out, and they were largely overlooked. A Secret Service report, I believe it was, that said Oswald was seen by a Secret Service driver outside the Willard Hotel in late September in Washington, D.C., late September of '63. And they, after the assassination, the guy who saw it said that was him. And it turns out the Willard Hotel was situated right next to an open car limousine. October, I think, 1st was a parade for JFK in an open car limo. And Oswald was seen in the hotel overlooking the limo parade site. And so I feel like that was their first attempt to do this, just 2 blocks from the White House. And for some reason it got scotched. There were too many eyewitnesses. It was like a first run, and Oswald went back to Dallas, and he waited for his time, and there was a motorcade through that town, and they brought him out along with some other gunmen, and Oswald was the fool they threw over to the police, and they rubbed him out afterward, and they got away with it.
See, I think a lot of people draw their conclusions about JFK from the movie JFK, which, of course, is a movie. It's entertainment. It's not meant to be accurate. And it's like, I've met people whose knowledge of the Scottish rebel William Wallace is from the movie Braveheart, where you had an Australian playing William Wallace, and that kind of sums up the story. It wasn't accurate at all. It's entertainment. And of course they talk about the magic bullet as if it's real. Well, there was no magic bullet. But that's for another argument. So is there anything you're working on for the future at all, Paul? I mean, I would recommend these books to anyone. I really would. What's coming up? You've got bound to be something else.
I've got 2 I'm working on. I'm glad you asked that. One is a kind of sequel to the Eisenhower tale in that Richard Nixon may have seen extraterrestrial bodies at an airbase while surrounded by guards on the exact 19th anniversary of the Eisenhower encounter. Now, how could that possibly be a coincidence?
Well, if you're looking into Nixon, you probably know the story of Nixon and Jackie Gleason.
Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah, I was going to say, do you think there's any substance to that, or is it just one of these rumors that keeps going around?
I think there's substance to it, but some people have polluted the story with things that are not true, like Jackie was at home and Nixon just happened to show up and drive him all the way down there. That's nonsense, I found out.
Tell our listeners the story, because I'm sure there's some that are not aware of the Nixon and Gleason story.
All right, it's a very interesting one, too. Jackie Gleason's wife told a 1970s magazine that one night in 1973, Jackie came home pale and shaking and smoking and drinking, and he was just overwrought, really overcome with emotion. And she said, "Where have you been? What's going on?"
Just emphasize who Jackie Gleason was.
Oh, right. Jackie was a TV and movie comedian, very famous in America. He made a lot of television shows that were popular, and by 1973, he was kind of on the outs, but he hosted a golf tournament in Miami where he lived, and sure enough, record show President Nixon showed up that very afternoon, February 19th, 1973, the exact 19th anniversary of the Eisenhower encounter, and Jackie and Nixon rode around in a golf cart that day, and they had their picture taken. And so later, when things were quiet at the Gleason home, Jackie came home late at night, and his wife said that Jackie said, "I was with President Nixon tonight. He showed me alien bodies at Homestead Air Force Base, which is just south of Miami." He says, "I can't believe it. I saw the evidence at last. There were 4 dead alien creatures laid out on these tables. They were about 4 feet tall and kind of grayish, I think, or yellow-gray in skin tone." And he was just totally shook up about this, and that Nixon knew about it and probably asked him not to talk about it, but he said it's considered a state secret. that the government knows full well we're being visited, and I'm really angry at the government for not releasing this information and making people who see UFOs and report them look like fools. So Jackie's wife at the time told this to a magazine when she was separated from Jackie Gleason, and Gleason was pretty upset with her but did not deny the story. For many years he went on, and I found out in a life Jackie gave an interview to Playboy magazine and admitted, yes, he went to an air base and saw dead alien bodies. So the story may well be legit, that Nixon probably went to the air base from his nearby Key Biscayne, Florida home, and that Jackie was driven there by an aide, and that Nixon knew full well Jackie Gleason was just privately obsessed with aliens and UFOs and had literally hundreds and hundreds of books on the subject and would bring it up all the time in private. And that's according to a number of people that Jackie knew, that he was just really into the paranormal. And that Nixon took pity on him one night and showed him the evidence that they had at this air base just south of Miami. And to me, it's almost like it was cursed, because that air base got wiped out by a hurricane. Jackie's house burned down on the golf course where he hosted the golf tournament. Nixon's house was bought and bulldozed. It's gone. Almost everything from those days are gone. People suffered from ill health in the years after the Nixon-Gleason encounter. And then, of course, they're all passed away.
Yeah, it's an amazing story, and I mean, Jackie Gleason's starring in a famous film that is one of my favourites from the era, and that's Smokey and the Bandit. And so, you know, I just by chance I was reading about the story again the other day. I don't know where it cropped up, but you say there's something else you're working on as well, Paul.
Yeah, are you familiar with a writer in America who produced books in the 60s, 70s, and 80s? Each one was a bestseller on the paranormal, named Ruth Montgomery.
Yes.
I used to be pen pals with her and exchanged letters in the 80s and 90s. And she issued a bunch of books that mentioned forecasts for the future by her alleged spirit guides that she would channel through automatic writing. And in these messages, some of it sound a little dire, and most of these, like I assembled about 10 of them that didn't seem to make sense or come true until the year 2020. And so many of these now sound completely accurate. And I thought, this sounds like a good book. Let's put this together. And she wrote extensively, including an entire book called Aliens Among Us that dealt with what her spirit guide said about alien visitation, that they are here watching us. And she gave the reasons why. And I think it makes for a very interesting book, and I've just about got it finished, and I'll be contacting a publisher soon.
That's excellent. Now, I don't know if you're actually aware, just give me 2 seconds and I'll bring this up for you. There was a recent publication, Washington Examiner, which only yesterday, which we are recording on Saturday the 20th of March, this is from March the 19th, and it quotes a former intelligence chief. Now, I've brought this up because you've actually mentioned many presidents have actually had some kind of visitation with ETs or seen UFOs, etc., or UAPs, if you want to call them that nowadays. John Ratcliffe, who served as the Director of National Intelligence under former President Donald Trump, was asked on Fox News by the host, now forgive me for my pronunciation of the surname, Maria Bartiromo. He was asked what he knew about unidentified flying objects that have captured people's imagination for generations. And this is a direct quote from Mr. Ratcliffe. There are a lot more sightings than have been made public, and some of these have been declassified. And when we talk about sightings, we are talking about objects that have been seen by Navy or Air Force pilots, or have been picked up by satellite imagery, that frankly engage in actions that are difficult to explain. Movements that are hard to replicate, that we don't have the technology for, or they're travelling at speeds that exceed the sound barrier without a sonic boom. Now, of course, Trump, like him or not, he did leave a law, if I remember correctly, stating that, is it the DOD or the Pentagon or whatever, had 6 months to actually make public what had actually, that the US government and the authorities over there know about the subject. What do you think about that, Paul?
You're right. I just saw that article like the other day. It's very interesting. So many people predicted that President Trump would blurt out something by accident or get spiteful and just tell everything. And he disappointed everyone by saying nothing about extraterrestrials. And he may attempt to return to power, and that may be a factor why. The story in the news that you just read may well be quite legitimate. It's interesting that the United States Congress passed this legislation saying the Pentagon has to release their files to us on UFOs. We want the truth, and it's just maybe a couple months away from the deadline. I find it difficult. The American public will still get told things will end up classified, or they'll make some sort of deal to keep it hushed up. I find it a little unusual that the Pentagon would turn over everything to even Congress, but we'll see. People are excited here about the possibility, but I always say brace for the worst, but hope for the best. I don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah, well, let's see what happens in the next few. I think, is it June? I think they have to
I think that's correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So, Paul, where can we get your books?
My latest book, President Eisenhower's Close Encounter, you can get it directly from www.foundationsbooks.net, or certainly from Amazon.com. And Mo 41, The Bombshell Before Roswell, you can get from www.a/argusbooks.com, Argus Publishing, where shipping is free. Or you can get it from Amazon.com. And I understand both books are doing fairly well, and they've gotten some pretty good reviews. I'm grateful for all of that, and I hope that you can check on the internet. I'm on Facebook with a special page for each book, and I enjoy little stories that people chip in now and then. I thank you for having me on the show to relay all of that, and hopefully we'll get us a TV show or maybe a theatrical film out of this eventually when Hollywood productions and documentary people get the cameras back rolling here in 2021.
Yeah, and I think they've started again certainly here in the UK they have in certain ways. So the states won't be far behind, I'm sure.
Let's hope so. I've heard that they are slowly getting the wheels in motion. Projects are kind of backed up. People are anxious to get back to work. I have not had a vaccine. I don't know if anyone under 60 in this country, unless you've got a special reason, has had a vaccine. So that seems to be a prerequisite, and that's kind of holding back probably a lot of options still. But we're getting there.
Well, I wish you every success with that. Paul, because we're in a similar situation working with Calvin Parker on the Pascagoula case.
Oh, yeah.
We've signed a contract to make a documentary series.
Oh, cool.
Obviously can't do that because we're not allowed to film, but Calvin has also been working with a producer in Hollywood, and they have finished writing the screenplay. So there is a drama series and a full movie screenplay finished. So hopefully, the timing will be right for that as we come out of lockdown and people are looking for new projects. That might be one of them.
That sounds exciting. I can't wait. When I was a little boy, I remember reading of that story and how the cops put a tape recorder in it in the station, and they just gave the most wonderful explanation of what they went through without knowing the cops were recording them to help buttress their case, support it. And so this should be very exciting.
Well, wherever you end up getting your TV series or a movie published, make sure you get it on Amazon Prime so we can see it over here in the UK.
All right. Sounds good to me.
Well, Paul, I'd just like to thank you for a most interesting conversation, and we do wish you every success with these publications. I think you said 6 books. Buy them all, folks. Give it a go. You got nothing to lose.
That's right. And buy hundreds of them if you can.
Yeah, buy hundreds each.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. And please excuse me trying to play devil's advocate, but that's just the way it is sometimes. But I would recommend your books to anyone. You know, they've come recommended to me from what I class as credible sources. So that's good enough for me.
Well, I thank you for having me on, and I enjoyed a stimulating conversation. I hope everyone listening enjoyed the information and that they'll be open-minded and read these books and the project you're working on, and we'll have an exciting year ahead of us.
Let's hope. Paul, thank you very much for your time.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me on.
Regular feature on the Paranormal UK radio network.